Well, let me begin with a little bit of background. I am Professor Emeritus at the University of Oklahoma. And what that means is I'm retired. And I retired in 2004 after having taught at OU for 31 years. And over those 31 years, I brought 16 groups of students out here to this tiny Spanish village of El Cerrito. Now, I've been told that I need to roll my R's better, so I will say El Cerrito and get those R's rolled. And the very first group that I ever brought out to El Cerrito was 1981. It was a group of graduate students, and guess what? Brock Brown was on that trip. And Brock liked it, and Brock was on the next half dozen trips, even though he wasn't a student in the class, you know, that he had to be on that trip for. And in fact, he became the regular for our van driver. I mean, Brock drove the van, and Brock was at OU for the next half dozen years. And then after Brock left OU and went to Texas State University, he began to bring students from Texas State. So Brock is a veteran out here, and Brock is very much my partner in all that goes on out here. I mean, he's been really in on this with me from almost the beginning. And then along came Doug Hurt. Over here is Doug Hurt. And Doug came out to El Cerrito on a field trip in a course, a seminar in historical geography, in 1997. He just reminded me a few minutes ago. And Doug then came on subsequent trips that he didn't have to come on, kind of as a volunteer. And guess what? Doug is now bringing his students out here. And of course, most of you, the majority of you, are from the University of Central Oklahoma. And now this is May of 2008. And you know the semester's over, so I think this has to be an intersession course. And I hear you talking about writing book reviews, Milagro Beanfield War. That is the funniest book I've ever read. And it's well worth reading and probably worth having a book review on too. Okay, so with that bit of background, let me say some things about El Cerrito. El Cerrito, I think, is a very precious place. And it's a very precious place for a number of reasons. One reason is that El Cerrito is isolated. There are only two ways to get into El Cerrito today. Two dirt roads. They're pretty rough dirt roads. One is 6 miles long and the other is 10 miles long. And there is a sign that says El Cerrito out on Route 3 to say that this is the road you'd turn to get to the village. But that sign usually isn't there because some villager doesn't want the fact to be announced that this is the way to El Cerrito. They want it to be isolated. So it's not easy to get to. You really have to have a purpose in mind if you want to go to El Cerrito. And the thing that's nice about that is that El Cerrito is well preserved. You know, it's an isolated place and therefore it's well preserved. So when you go to the plaza and you see those houses that form a rectangle around the plaza, you're looking at the houses that were built when El Cerrito was founded in 1824. And when you see the church, well, that's not the original church. That must be the second church. A date in the beam says 1888. But you look at the irrigation ditch, and it makes, you know, a big loop all the way around the village. And it has to be the original irrigation ditch. And the long lots, the agricultural lots that I understand some of you looked at today, are the original, fields, agricultural fields. So El Cerrito is precious because it's well preserved. El Cerrito is also precious because it is recent as Spanish villages go. El Cerrito was founded in 1824. Well, Santa Fe was founded in 1607. El Cerrito was founded at the beginning of the Mexican period. 1821 was the beginning of the Mexican period. That makes it recent. And what is nice about that is that you do not see undecipherable layers of change. It's well preserved, and what is preserved is the original stuff. Unlike Santa Fe, which is, 200 years older, you don't have layers of things that really are kind of hard to decipher, and you're not sure, just when this may have come about. So that's the second reason, I think, why El Cerrito is precious. It's isolated, and it's recent as villages go. A third reason that El Cerrito is precious is that it is tiny. It's a tiny little village. And it's not only tiny, but it's compact. Now, if you drive around New Mexico much, you'll be aware that New Mexican little agricultural villages are often strung out along an irrigation ditch. They're elongated, usually. They're loosely agglomerated. They're not compact. El Cerrito is unusually compact. And the reason for that is that the site that El Cerrito sits on is not a big site. And they chose this terrace level. I was telling you yesterday, this is called T2, terrace level 2. There's a T1 below it, and there's a floodplain that's down right by the river below that. But they had, roughly 5 acres to work with on T2 for the site for the village. So it's very compact and it's tiny. How tiny is it? Well, there are probably 30 houses in El Cerrito, and the population of El Cerrito today is probably 14. Okay, in the year 2000, I think the population may have been in the low 20s, 22. When I first came out here in 1980, it was 11. Well, that's pretty small. The largest that the population ever was in El Cerrito was 321. And that was, believe it or not, 17 years after the village was founded, which was, 1824. That was in 1841. When a census was taken, there were 321 people here. And then immediately, almost immediately after the census was taken, like, a month later, half those people moved. And this is documented, and it's very interesting. And what happened was that there was a land distribution in the town of Las Vegas grant, a land grant, the little town of San Agustin. There was a land distribution there, and the people here somehow got wind of it, and the ones that were landless, that didn't own these long lots, and solares, the house lots, they simply picked up and went, probably in one caravan of wagons, because they were eager to have their own land, and if they could get it free, well, this was a windfall. So El Cerrito is a precious place because it's tiny, and it's compact. And when you drive over the mesa and you kind of stop and you look down at that little place and you think to yourself, whoa, I'm here to study this little village, you can kind of be deceived, because you can look down there and you can think, well, that's going to be a piece of cake, man. That village is just too tiny, to not be able to learn about pretty quick, a couple days. And that's wrong. It actually is a whole lot more complicated than than a tiny little village would lead you to believe.